we just asked Mr. Mooney to take me through the protocol of the meeting.
Thank you, Convener. Welcome to this meeting of Dundee City Council's Scrutiny Committee, which is being held remotely in terms of Section 43 of the Local Governance in Scotland Act 2003. All members in attendance are able to fully participate in the meeting, which is being recorded. Should any member need to leave the meeting for any reason, can they please use the chat to advise of this? If a member loses their connection, they should make every effort to rejoin the meeting, but if this is not possible, the Committee Services Officer will note their absence for the remainder of the meeting. If you have to leave the meeting due to a declaration of interest, you must remain out of the meeting until invited back in. Would all members please mute their microphones when not speaking to avoid background noise, and turn off any smart speakers. Please start the meeting with your camera on. Your face will appear on the screen when you are speaking. If your connection is poor, you may wish to turn off your camera and see if this improves matters. If this doesn't help, you may wish to quickly leave the meeting and rejoin. If you wish to raise a point of order, ask a question, speak on any item, or move a motion or amendment, please use the chat when the relevant item is called. The convener will then invite you to speak. Would members of the press and public please not post messages in the chat? Where items are for noting, or where there has been no disagreement expressed, the convener will call for any member who has a contrary view to indicate this through the chat, otherwise the item will be agreed. Please would members not use the chat for any other purposes, as those joining the meeting by telephone cannot see the chat and therefore will not be able to follow the debate. Although we are operating in a different way, this is still a formal meeting of the Scrutiny Committee, and the required standards of behaviour and discussion are the same as in a face-to-face meeting. Standing orders will apply to the proceedings, and the terms of the Councillors' Code of Conduct will also apply in the normal way. Does any member have any queries regarding this procedure? There are no queries, Convener, so I'll now ask the Committee Services Officer to take a roll call for the minute. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And as mentioned, I will now take a roll call for the minute, and I would ask if members would confirm they are present when I call their name. Convener.
Present.
Bailey Wright.
Present.
Bailey McPherson.
Good afternoon. Present.
Thank you. And I've received apologies from Bailey Derek Scott. Bailey Soares.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. Deputy Lord Provost Cardell.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor O'Nacla.
Hi, I'm present.
Thank you. Councillor Short. Councillor Short. You'll mark them as absent at present. That concludes the roll call. It then takes you on to declarations of interest. There's more not any members for any declarations to the content of the agenda as it stands. And there being no declarations that I can see at this time, item 2 then before his external inspection report for Gilburn House. This is a report by the Executive Director of Children and Family Services. You're asked to give the recommendations.
Okay. Would you like to make any comment on the report, Mrs. May?
Thank you, Convener. Yes, just to say that this is overall a really positive report. The inspection of Gilburn House looked at just 2 evaluations over the 2 QIs around children feeling safe and loved and cared for. And also the other inspection area was around staff and leaders having the capacity to really support everything that children need, the resources, the capacity to support what children need and to uphold their needs and their rights. So the evaluations were both good there. As with all inspections, there's always areas for improvement identified as well. And so the areas there are around planning, risk assessment. It refers to our new template and new approach to risk assessment and quality assurance processes. So that's a very high level summary, and I'll stop there, and I have Glenn Lloyd on the call as well to help if you have specific questions.
Okay, we'll start off with Bailey McPherson then, please.
Thanks very much, Convener, and I agree completely with Mrs. May. This is a very good report and a pleasure to read, to be honest. My question's really around something that Mrs. May mentioned, the new risk assessment template. I'm just really seeking the assurance that the department and indeed Gilburn House itself engages with the Care Inspectorate to ensure that its requirements and its expectations in relation to risk and the risk assessment process that arising out of the report are actually met.
Thank you for the question, Billy McPherson. I would want to give you that assurance, but I'll ask Glenn to add just a little detail to that. Thank you.
Just thanks, Audrey, and thank you, Councillor McPherson. And absolutely, yes, we're confident that we will be able to give the Care Inspectorate and yourselves that assurance. As you can see in the report, we've introduced the new risk assessment template. The template asks staff to identify risks in terms of what the risk is, when it might occur, what circumstances there might be around at the time, and also alongside that to identify any mitigating actions we might take to reduce the risk. Obviously, the template itself is only a document, and that will come alongside some additional training to support the staff to use the document to understand, analyse the risk and mitigate the risk. So we're confident that with all those things in place, we'll actually be able to give those assurances. And I think the confidence is reinforced by the fact that the last inspection, one of the areas for improvement was related to the quality of child's plans. And as you can see from the report, we've also met that and in fact exceeded that with the Care Inspectorate saying that the quality of child's plans was very high during this visit. So I think we're building on strong foundations and I'm confident that we'll be able to meet that particular requirement.
Thanks very much, Glenn. Appreciated.
Yeah. Councillor Nackler.
Yeah, no, it's a good report, and I just had two questions. I can see that it says last inspection grades when it was around assessment and care planning, we got a 3, which is adequate, and there seems to have been improvement. I just wondered what you did that improved that to hear young people's voices, and I guess it's just do you plan on maintaining that so that young people they're reflected within the plan? And then secondly, I'm just wondering how you measure a child feeling loved. I just wondered what is used to measure that.
I think, Glenn, do you want to come in and answer some of that? Thank you.
Glenn, you're on mute. Apologies, convener. So yes, Councillor Nackler, we've introduced a new template which encourages the staff to be smart in the plans, specific, measurable, etc., etc. Again, we've supported that with additional training for the staff so that they can understand what's required and actually implement it in accordance with expectations. In terms of measuring loved, well, first and foremost, the Care Inspectorate ask the young people. They ask their families, you know, how does it feel around here? What sort of support are you getting? What difference is that making? Is there anything else we could do differently, less of, more of, better, etc., etc.? And again, as you can see from the report, that the feedback on that in that regard was very positive. I think in there was a third question perhaps that I've missed and not answered.
No, I think you've answered it. I think it was just more about maintaining that input from young people, that we were committed to continuing that. I guess with your answer about feeling loved, I'm just wondering, once children have left the service, do we then do a questionnaire to follow up? Because we obviously know there's power dynamics, and I'm just wondering if while in the service they might say that, is there that discussion afterwards about their experience, which just might help to kind of even improve the service even further?
Well, again, we don't typically at the moment, we don't routinely carry out an exit interview to ask them how they feel, but what we do have at the moment, and that's something we can consider going forward, what we do have at the moment is advocacy from Who Cares, a commissioned service who come in and offer that independent ear, shall we say, so that the young people can express their views in a more comfortable way without that power imbalance that you're alluding to.
Yeah, thank you. I think an exit interview might be something to explore, but thank you for that.
Glenn, can I maybe ask on the risk assessment? I know you've answered Billy McPherson on that, and it sounds like there is a plan to address it. But obviously, the wording obviously makes reference to capturing the sort of vulnerabilities of young people.
and wondering what the changes are that have made that happen. And if we went to a much more sort of officer judgment on that assessment than a sort of tick box paper exercise. And the reason I ask that is that in later reports, it makes reference to high turnover of staff. So getting that level of knowledge embedded in the system for something that will be there throughout other establishments, no doubt, is really important, I believe.
Absolutely, convener. And there's oversight of those risk assessments. There's oversight via standard routine quality assurance processes. There's oversight via team meetings. There's oversight via supervision. And crucially, for care experienced children and people in all of the houses, there's oversight via formal, so-called, via the regulatory requirements, looked after child reviews, which are carried out by one of our independent reviewing officers, the senior officers, of which we have 7 across the service. So there are strong scrutiny arrangements which are internal, in addition to the external scrutiny arrangements applied by the Care Inspectorate.
Thanks very much for that. There being no other questions, I take it this report's agreed. That looks to be agreed then, and we'll move on to the next one. I'd obviously, like others, thanks to the staff for the efforts they put in on the city's behalf.
Thank you very much, Convener. Before moving on to item 3, I'd just like to confirm with the committee that Councillor Short has now joined the meeting and will be recorded as being present in the minute. Okay, item 3 then, before his external inspection report for the junction, I ask you the recommendations.
You'd like to say a few words again, Mrs. May?
Yes, thank you, Convener. And as you can see, this is another one of our children's and young people's houses being inspected earlier this year. And this time, the Care Inspector just looked at one evaluation area, one area for grading and evaluating, and it was the same area that we've already discussed there, that how young people are feeling and being kept safe and feeling loved and getting the most out of life. And for this grade, they received very good, which is even more reassuring. So very positive. And again, you know, lots of positive messages in there about relationships and how well our young people are cared for. But as always, again, with scrutiny in some areas recommended for improvement, and this one is around service planning. So that's the very high level summary of the junction. And again, I'll leave it to see if there's questions.
Okay, there's a question from Billy McPherson.
Thanks indeed, Convener, and I concur completely with what Mrs. May had to say there. The junction has a very good track record in terms of past and this inspection, and it's very reassuring to see that continued high level of care and support continues. My question in a way is about the area for improvement. I sort of felt in a way, I mean, it indicates to optimise outcomes for young people and meaningfully engage them in their care and support, which is something I think we would all agree the junction was already doing. And I was just really wondering if there's, and I suppose you could argue, well, the inspector has to come up with some sort of recommendation. The reality in this case is a very good facility, very well managed and providing a very high level of care and support. I was just really wondering if there's anything arising out of the inspection in relation to this engagement that the junction will aim to do any differently, or is it just a matter of continuing the good work that has been ongoing for a long time?
Thanks, Billy McPherson. Again, I'll ask Glenn if he wants to come in with some of the detail about how the staff have responded to this report.
Yeah, thank you, Audrey, and thank you again, Bailey McPherson. And my interpretation of this is that it's the Care Inspectorate nudging us really beyond very good and ultimately, ideally, towards excellent. And you'll see in that paragraph as well that they're not just saying engage meaningfully in care and support, but that we benchmark, sorry, with other areas in terms of best practice, other local authorities and other organisations. You can see there, for instance, that we're implementing the trauma-informed rupture and repair approach. We're implementing Mind of My Own. We're trying basically to more effectively listen to the voice of children and people in the house as a group and on a one-to-one individual basis, and to more effectively be able to demonstrate responses to that, both as a group and on an individual basis. That's the initial response. The response from the staff, as you've alluded to, has always been positive at the junction. But going forwards, what we intend to do is carry out further benchmarking as well in other areas in terms of how we might build on that and how we might reach that aspiration of excellence, not just within the junction, but across all of the houses.
Okay, thanks very much for that.
Okay, doesn't appear to be any other questions. Can this report be agreed? Okay, we'll move on to the next item.
Okay, thank you, Convener. Item 4 then, before his external inspection report on Millview Cottage. Again, you're asked to give the recommendations.
And Mrs. May, over to you for the high-level overview.
Thank you, Convener. And once again, a positive report. As you can see, over 3 grades this time. So the Care Inspectorate decided to look at the 3 levels there around being safe and loved and cared for. Also about our staff and our leaders and their capacity and resourcing and so on. And also a focus on children's rights. And as you can see, we've got 2 good evaluations for leadership and staff and rights. And again, for being safe and loved and cared for, very good evaluations. So again, a very, very positive report. Great to see the good work that our colleagues in our houses are doing, and so it's real testament to them and their commitment. So it's very, very positive. But again, recommendations around improving risk assessment, just improving plans slightly as well, and looking at our own quality assurance processes, which Glenn has already alluded to. We don't just take it for granted that these improvements are in place. We have to employ our own quality assurance processes to ensure that. So I'll leave it there, I think, and see if you've got questions. Thank you.
Okay. I see that Billy Wright's coming in for a question. Billy Wright.
Yeah, thank you. Audrey, I always question adequate, because adequate to me is just okay. And adequate's next to weak. And I try hard not to be negative when I see them, but adequate, I mean, I think at the end of the day, I would be questioning it's saying the quality of staffing, but I think, do you have enough staff in that area that's able to cope with the type of work? And considering Millview Cottage has had good and very good in the past, it was quite a surprise actually to see adequate there.
Thanks for the question, Billy Wright. But I'm wondering if our previous table is causing a bit of confusion, because we do have again, this was at the request of Scrutiny Committee some time ago, that we put in the previous grades awarded from inspections. So that's perhaps causing a bit of confusion. So apologies if that's the case. But I will just reiterate that the evaluations for this inspection were 2 goods and a very good. So we have had adequates in the past. So in some ways, thank you for highlighting, because you can see the improvement that's been made. But certainly there are no adequates on this occasion. Does that explain it? I think it's our table that's maybe caused confusion, Convener.
I think the table's at the start of the report. I thought, Billy Wright, you were perhaps on the wrong report and probably been on the foster care report that has things adequate, I believe. But
no,
okay.
I certainly have picked up on, I don't know if my pages are mixed up, but certainly the report that I'm looking at is the Millview Cottage report. So
page 29 on that report, or that mentions
page 29.
But that mentions 2019, 17 and 16 reports, whereas the 2023 one is moving on further, like the page 39, where it's very, very good and good.
I apologise for that if you were having an attack, Audrey. But I've pulled my papers out of sync, and that's certainly the case. I just picked up on that. Sorry.
Very easily done, no problem at all.
Okay, appears to be no other questions on this report. So is this report agreed? Okay, Willie.
Okay, thank you. Item 5 then, before his external inspection reports on fostering and adoption teams, you're asked to give the recommendations.
You want to make any comment, Audrey?
Yeah. Probably overarching comment would be this is a bit of a disappointing report, but very much anticipated, because we had also engaged with the Association of Fostering, Kinship and Adoption teams to look at some self-evaluation and validated self-evaluation as a service, because we realised this is an area that we really wanted to improve upon. So and you already highlighted yourself, convener, that so the inspection evaluations here are adequate, weak and adequate for the 3 areas that they'd looked at. So I'll hand over to Glyn if he wants to add some more to that, and then we'll see if you've got some questions.
Okay, I see Billy McPherson's in for a question now.
Thanks indeed, and thanks, Mrs. May. And I would agree. This obviously a service that's a little way to go compared to, you know, obviously the very glowing reports that we've read up to now. And clearly there's a bit of an issue around leadership, you know, weakness around leadership. And I note that it says, you know, there's been a high turnover of staff and perhaps a lack of continuity and support. And I'm just really wondering if we can have some assurances about how the turnover issue and maintaining a degree of stability within the service is being tackled.
Thank you. And Glenn Lloyd, our head of service, has been leading on this, and there's certainly been some significant changes made to leadership and management team around this particular area. So I'll hand over to Glenn to give you some reassurances. Thank you.
Thank you, Audrey. Thank you again, McPherson. And leadership was a theme identified both in the inspection and, in fact, in the AFCA review as well. And I was going to say at the outset that, in fact, I have Lynn McBean with me today on the call. She's the new service manager for this part of the service, and also Sandra Howden, who's one of the 2 team managers for this part of the service. She's the newest team manager for this part of the service in the fostering team. So we've got new management arrangements in place, but building on that going forwards, we do intend to implement some new leadership and management training, not just for this part of the service, but for the service as a whole. And in terms of staffing capacity in the team and levels of turnover, you'll see in the report that we're now fully staffed within both teams. And I should add that the teams are also far more stable, so that since last summer, there's been no turnover. We're not anticipating any turnover. And I don't know whether or not Lynn and Sandra want to add to this, but certainly the mood in the team at the moment following the inspection, when it was initially quite down, given the inspection findings, is somewhat upbeat. And there's confidence that we're implementing the improvement plan at pace and actually moving forward in the right direction. But as I say, I don't know whether or not Lynn and Sandra might want to add to that, or even, in fact, if you might want to ask them any specific questions in that regard.
Yeah, I'd be delighted to hear any input from Lynn and Sandra. But you know, I have to say, Glenn, I'm reassured that, you know, having full staffing and you know, no ongoing turnover certainly is, you know, it's a long way down the road, isn't it, of providing that stability, which I think is very, very reassuring.
I don't know then if Sandra wants to come in perhaps and add something about that.
Hi, yeah, I think that from both teams' perspectives, I think they're both feeling a lot more settled. They're very motivated, and they've been on board with the improvement plan from the start. They're all working really hard. There's definitely a better feeling in the team.
That's very good to know. I'm grateful for the input, Sandra.
Okay, Billy Wright.
Thank you. Yeah, I was actually a bit disappointed to see that, because the foster and adoption team have to work very hard to get themselves up and running again after lockdown, although I do know that you did work with families during that time. I'm pleased to hear that there is no staff shortage anymore. Obviously, the turnover of staff during lockdown must have affected the service in some shape or form. But I'm more interested in staff morale and how they're coping now.
I think sort of probably perhaps you got that answer from Sandra saying that things had picked up, Helen. So, which, you know, hoping that Again, it answers the question that staff morale has obviously got a bit better than it was.
Well, it's good to hear that staff morale has has got better. But I think what I was looking for was assurances that this is going to continue into the future. I mean, what have you put in place to make sure that the staff get their say in and how they're feeling?
Lynn?
Yeah, thank you, Convener. And again, Bailey, right, thank you for the question. Just to add then to what we've said and what Sandra has said, we are fully staffed. We have involved both teams in the development of the improvement plan. We have an improvement plan steering group as well, which consists not just of Lynn and Sandra and Liz May, the other team manager, but also representative members of each of the two teams. Collectively, we've outlined the plan and given key leads to key areas, and I think collectively we're moving forward on that, as I said earlier, in the right direction, with a degree of confidence that actually when the Care Inspectorate come back in 6 months' time and report again to the Scrutiny Committee, you'll be seeing some very different inspection grades.
Look forward to that, Glenn. Thank you.
Can I maybe ask it? Sorry, I'll allow Councillor Al Nacklet in before myself.
Very gracious of you, thank you, Convener.
Yes, we are.
Yeah, I just wondered, had you received any complaints? Because if we're adequate, then obviously we would want to be better and weak in certain points. But had there been any complaints from service users? I know that I've wondered about this before in terms of, again, a power dynamic. If the service isn't great but people are not complaining, is that they're an atmosphere where they feel they can have that conversation and that communication's open?
Lynn?
Okay, thank you, Convener. And Councillor Nacklet, no, we haven't received any complaints. Even less formal than that, we haven't received any concerns either about the nature and level of support. What we have received, though, from foster carers is some misgivings, if you like, about the level of financial support in the current financial environment, the cost of living crisis. And that's something that we're actively looking at the moment to make sure that as far as possible, our foster carers are adequately remunerated. But I have to say as well that we're in the top third of fee-paying local authorities in Scotland, but certainly we want to review that because, as we know, it's a very challenging financial environment for everybody at the moment.
And sorry, just if it's okay, just to follow up. And do you feel that there is a culture where people can complain, or I don't like the word complaint because sometimes it is just basic communication, and then once that communication's happened, there is not a complaint. But do you feel that between the foster carers, those that are adopting, that communication is fluid, that is happening? Do you think it can be improved?
Councillor, I would like to think so, and I would like to think so because the foster carers have their own social worker with whom they have strong relationships, and I think the report alludes to that. The children in those placements also have their own social workers, so there's a clear demarcation of roles, and the children, crucially, can complain separately to their own social workers and others if they see fit. They're also entitled to advocacy support, so they can complain via those channels as well. And they know equally that they can complain via other channels, such as via the Care Inspectorate or, in fact, the SSSC. So I would like to think so, but I'm confident that given the content of the report, which does, as I say, allude to very good relationships, even given the context of staff turnover, that relationships are generally very, very strong. I think the key issue for us at the moment is implementation of the improvement plan, as I said separately, exploration of financial remuneration arrangements.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Maybe if I can ask a few questions. I don't believe that people go to their work in a day and hope to come out having produced a service that's weak. And, you know, they go in trying to give it their absolute best. And I wonder what we as an authority could have been doing differently to make that, you know, to have avoided some of the things that are picked up on, such as week. You know, I'd like to know what sort of level of staff turnover we actually have had over the sort of 2 year and how that's affected, because I see time and time again that reports that come forward for external inspection that say staff turnover has been an issue. So, you know, from our in quality assurance point of view, surely that's an immediate flag. We're seeing people exiting an organisation. How we're not trying to plug the gap, how we're not trying to make a difference. So, you know, what have we done to let people down? You know, you look at the Ofsted report down south or the investigation in Ofsted, schools drops through the floor and a teacher takes it that serious that she takes her own life. You know, so what can we do as an authority to make sure that we best protect our staff and that they're not trying their best, but, you know, coming out within an organisation that's not reflecting the efforts that they feel they're putting in. You know, so, you know, like there is bound to be things that we've seen time and time again, inspectors focus on, and staff turnover appears to let we down endlessly on these inspections. So I'd like to know where we go, what our quality assurance programme is going forward that's going to make a real difference. And, you know, unlike others where I've had negative reports about the foster service in our authority, people have went elsewhere, the foster in Angus rather than Dundee, because historically they fell out somewhere along the line with Dundee. You know, I get that we've been trying to make improvements with then, but, you know, these are the most vulnerable of kids, and you know, that reflects that we're not delivering the greatest service for them. Okay, that's the questions asked and the comments made, so over to the Chief Executive for a response.
Thanks, Bailey Keenan. So I'm sure Glyn and Audrey can provide information to scrutiny members just regarding turnover. And I think it's important to note, certainly, turnover can occur for many reasons. Those that decide to leave the organisations, those that decide to retire, and indeed those that move to promoted posts. But we can provide you with that information because it's something that officers look at within their service on a regular basis. Just in terms of a staff perspective and to give Scrutiny Committee assurances, there is a number of support that comes from our learning and organisational development team around mentoring, around coaching, around peer support. So again, from a staff perspective, happy to provide a summary of that information and support that's available so you can see what we're trying to do to make sure people feel supported and we retain them going forward. And perhaps, Convener, Mrs May or Mr Lloyd might want to talk more specifically about the service, but I thought it was important to highlight context from a council perspective.
Okay, thank you.
Happy just to add that, you know, Glyn and I are in particular are trying to spend more time actually in the different teams. We visit the teams regularly. We're listening to what their feedback is about how things are going. Obviously, where we see workforce development and training issues that will help our staff to feel more confident and deal, as you say, and Convener, with some of our most vulnerable children, that we're really trying to focus our attention on that, and we continue to do that. We trying to have regular planned visits to the various teams across the different parts of the service to really listen firsthand to our people about, you know, how they're feeling about day-to-day operational work, and also look at, you know, plans for their development as been alluded to. But happy to get more information to you if that will help.
Okay. Lenny, you want to make any further comment?
Only, Convener, to say that I think it was 5 staff over a 2-year period. 1 was VER, 1 was a promotion, and 3 were sideways moves. And obviously all during, or more or less during the pandemic. And as you can see in the report, we were aware, as well as what Audrey said, of some areas for improvement within the team, and that's why we commissioned AFCA to come in. They've come in at the same time that the inspection have come in and carried out their work, reached the same conclusions. But I think that now that's happened, they both reported in December last year. We've got a strong foundation to build on. You know, we have a new service manager, we have a relatively new team manager in Sandra, who's here as well today, and I do think that we've got a strong foundation to build on going forwards.
Yeah. Given that you brought an external organisation in, you're obviously a feeling for things weren't going as well as they could have. They felt the need to do that. you know, how quick did we get that sort of feeling, and how quick did we action? Because, you know, it'd been ideal that, you know, we know how good our organisation is, and we'll make these changes as early as possible, so that they would then end up being an external body that says you're weak.
So Bailey Keenan, we knew historically that we'd struggled, for instance, with the recruitment of foster carers, especially for teenagers and of children with a disability. And that was the main driver for the commissioning of the external review. But we also took the opportunity, given that AFCA were coming in as external experts, to ask them to broaden the terms of reference of that review and include a focus on general support and safeguarding arrangements, including with reference to benchmarking with other local authorities and other organisations. We suspected within that there are issues in relation to training, in relation to risk assessments, in relation to child's plans, but we wanted that to be confirmed, and we wanted recommendations which pointed us in the right direction to help address that. That's what we now have. We now have not just the inspection report, but also a 62-page report from AFCA, which we've folded together in the form of one single improvement plan. And as I say, we're making good progress in relation not just to the requirements, the 3 requirements from the inspection, but also in relation to all the improvement areas for improvement and recommendations from the AFCA review.
Okay, thanks very much for that. I see no other questions. Is this report agreed? Again, obviously, I pass my thanks on to those that work in the organisation in this particular field. You know, I think, you know, it is the most vulnerable kids in the city. You know, it's something that, you know, I care passionate about. Hence the reason, hopefully, the questions were relevant, and, you know, I think it's one that I would want to see improvement on, and no doubt the people that work there go every day to do their best for the children in Dundee. So well done to them. Okay, Wally.
You know, I'm not sure if Councillor Short's trying to get your attention.
Okay, sorry, Councillor Short, in you come. You're on mute. Still on mute. No, you're on mute. She froze out again. Honestly, that wasn't a mad doing. Don't want any of you thinking that for a minute. If Councillor Short gets back in the meeting, we'll come back to that, whatever comments she wants to make. Quite happy for her to do that. So I think scrutiny is really important.
Okay, thank you very much then. Can we take you on to item 6 then, the HMI inspection of St John's High School. Again, you're asked to give the recommendations.
Yeah, Mrs. May, you're looking to make a comment?
Thank you, convener. Yeah, just obviously in November 22 there was an inspection of St John's. It was a full inspection. Happy to say that Sean Hagney, our head teacher, has joined us today. If you have specific questions for himself, so full inspection with the full set of core QIs inspected, leadership of change, learning, teaching and assessment, ensuring wellbeing, equality and inclusion, raising attainment and achievement, and these are on page 2 of the report, and all of these evaluated as satisfactory. I'm sure Sean himself would say that would not be his ambition to have these evaluations as satisfactory, but he had only been in the school for probably well, less than 2 years, and so on a journey, and it was good to see that recognised. So we see this actually overall as quite a positive report, in that there's some really important key strengths there. It's great to see that the leadership of the new head teacher is listed as the first strength of the school, and that's really important when we realise that Sean was taking the school in a different direction and building on good work before, but certainly picking up a pace in terms of improvement. And of course, inspections, they choose their timing. So maybe if this had come a wee bit later, Sean would have been happier, but there you are. Great to hear that the strong tradition of the Catholic school in terms of the Maris traditions is still very strong in that school, and referencing our 3 Ps of presence, participation and progress through our Every Dundee Learner Matters strategy. So great to see all of that highlighted. They're great opportunities for the school. And again, always a joy for us when we see our young people highlighted as the strengths, and particularly focused on the role model, the very positive role models of the senior school. So all very positive, but as we know, again, with all scrutiny, areas for improvement, and certainly in terms of the areas there, you know, interesting that they pick up on improvement around senior and middle leadership, in particular focus for us on middle leadership across the city just now. So all of that into an action plan, which will form the basis of the school improvement plan going forward. So I think that's probably enough for me, and I'll wait to see if you have questions for myself, Paul Fleming as the Head of Education on the call, or Pam, or indeed Sean himself. Thank you.
First of all, I noticed that Councillor Short had got back in the meeting, but what we'll deal with this, Councillor Short, is this item, then we'll come back and revisit the comments or question that you wanted on the last item. So we'll start with Bailey McPherson.
Thanks very much, Convener, and thanks to Mrs May for her introduction. As Mrs May knows, this is a school with which I would say I have a close association. I attend the Parent Council very regularly, and I took part in, I don't know what Education Scotland calls it, but what I would call a stakeholders meeting as part of the inspection process. And I mention that simply because the feedback from stakeholders, that included church representatives, people with involved in the charitable work the school does, people in the community. I think I came along more as a community representative. I think we would all say this is a school that's a whole lot more than satisfactory, and I think it's a school with very good care and positive ethos, positive values. And if I take one very positive thing from the report, it does recognise, if you like, the positive leadership that Sean has shown since coming to the school, and I think that's a good thing. He's making his mark, and I'm very pleased about that. So I think I'm confident in my mind that future reports will be, shall we say, get gradings more than satisfactory, because I think the school's in a positive journey. My question's really around the area for improvement, which is about the quality of learning, teaching and assessment. I was just really wondering whether that comes from the director or comes from Sean at the school, if we could get some more information about what's being done to improve the quality of learning, teaching and assessment at St John's.
Thank you, Bill McPherson. I think Sean would probably be best placed to see what the journey they're on with that. Thank you. Yeah, I'm more than happy to talk to that, and thanks for your generous comments, Bailey McPherson. What we've been well, I think reading this report, I agree wholeheartedly with Audrey that satisfactory is not good enough, and we are on that journey of improvement, and we want to get there. I think we know that the pandemic has affected everyone, but not affected everyone equally, and the report does recognise that our school community was particularly affected by the pandemic, particularly in the previous 2 years before I arrived, but I would also say it's quite significantly last session as well. That affected our learning and teaching, that affected how we do our core business, that affected really every aspect of the school, and we are moving to recover from that. One of the things that I was gratified about in the report was that the areas that they were identifying as next steps were really already in our improvement plan. So they were recognising and pointing out what needs improved, but we had already acknowledged those, and that was part of our planning. One of the things that has positively came out of the inspection is a new standard, the St John's standard that we're calling it, and we've got a group of teachers with young people agreeing this standard for learning and teaching within the classroom. So we've got a very good
learning teaching policy that had been written pre-pandemic and finalised more recently. And we're building upon that to create this new standard for learning and teaching, to create that clarity for our staff and young people and a consistency across the school. Because what the inspectors saw was some very good episodes of learning and teaching, but what they wanted was greater consistency across the school. So that's our main aim around learning and teaching. And in terms of assessment, there's always work to do, but it's been a particularly challenging environment with the goalposts changing in the senior school every year, a different approach to the verification of qualifications. But there has been a real willingness to look again at the broad general education, to take into account the benchmarks from Education Scotland and our own local authority tools to help us assess progression through the broad general education. So greater moderation there and returning, if you like, to normal with SQA and the usual practices and procedures. And I think that will help. We're already seeing improvements in those areas in the school. Is that answered your question, Bailey?
Yeah, thanks very much, Sean. It most certainly has. That was, you know, a good deal of detail. I have to say the concept of the St John's standards is an excellent one in terms of ensuring clarity and consistency right across the school. So it's reassuring to hear that, and grateful for your feedback. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that, Bailey Wright.
Thank you. I'm on page 84. And it's near the bottom. It's the review and update of the school's anti-bullying policy, and it has promptly at the back of it. I was just wondering, what changes are you likely to make to actually ensure that you're doing what they're asking?
Yeah, I think this was in response to what young people and parents were saying through the questionnaires and in focus groups to the inspectors. So young people were concerned, as they are in every school in Scotland, around bullying behaviour and inappropriate behaviour. This is, again, pandemic related. We're seeing that in general society, not just in our schools, around more challenging behaviour in recent times, and it's something, you know, we want to positively address. We do have an anti-bullying policy, but we are reviewing our whole behaviour policy. We called it a relationships policy, to bring it more into line with the UNCRC, a more relational approach to everything that we're doing in our school, and really even further bring our Catholic values into practice in our daily dealings with one another. And much of that relates to the anti-bullying agenda. If we can get our core relationships right, we can spend more time and concentrate more on episodes and relationships that go wrong. We have a staff and young people team. We've been doing focus groups around a relaunched anti-bullying policy. Just last night at a staff meeting, we had feedback on that and our progress so far. But there's some more work to be done to launch that and to agree that and make sure all the stakeholders that we want involved are involved in that process.
That sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Nicola.
Hi. Thanks for answering all those questions. It was just one more about one of the areas of improvements around demonstrating and developing inclusive practice. I just wondered how you plan to do so.
Well, inclusive practice is what we do in our school, and we believe that we are a very inclusive school, and again, that's about how we are and how we do it. Again, I will go back to our relationships policy, and our rethinking of that. I think what HMI did was come and challenge us to be more relational. And I think in light of the UNCRC becoming part of Scots law, the wider adoption of restorative practices across schools, the work that we've been doing on being trauma informed, being more nurturing, is all about being more inclusive, and we are working hard to get that right as a universal approach, and then working with our with all staff, but especially staff like guidance teachers and support for learning staff, to ensure that every child is included and feels included, because we're a community that aims for all our young people to feel safe, to feel included, and indeed to feel loved within St John's High School.
Okay. Councillor Short.
Thank you. This is when every day is a school day, and I'm hoping that someone can help me out with this. In point 4.4, you talk about and I might not be pronouncing this correctly, but the Marist values that influence the work of the schools. Can you explain to me what that is, please?
You told me you were a Catholic too.
No, my dad's a Catholic.
Yeah, there you go. Go and ask them.
Yeah, your dad might know all about this, particularly if he's an ex-pupil of St John's High School. So in 1931, the Dundee City Council at that time invited the Marist brothers, who are an order of religious brothers who teach. That's their main focus around the world. A French organisation to begin with, but are around 80 countries around the world, to set up a school in Dundee. So brothers up till the mid-90s had been head teachers of St John's High School. Brother Bede being a very well known person within the city, and those values are about love of work, the family spirit, about presence, which is interesting, given that that's one of our 3 priorities within Dundee City Council as well. The way of Mary, because within the Catholic tradition, Mary is an important role model and teacher for us all, for staff, and for pupils, and these values are things that we talk about and try and be inspired by and try and live out in our daily lives within a school. So those things are often talked about within our school, alongside our expectations of being ready to learn, being respectful, and being safe. And as we try to reach our goals of all our young people being present and actively learning, participating in their learning and in the life of the school, and progressing successfully. Does that help?
That does, and I'm ashamed to say my granddad was the Johnny at the Wee Marys, so he'll probably have a kick at me when I'm in my dreams tonight. But thank you very much. I really appreciate that.
No problem. And I think, but somebody else can correct me, but I think St Mary's was also founded by the Marists.
Well, I think you're probably right, because I remember going to get the sweeties from the tuck shop and we always saw Mary when we went in. So yeah, I think you might have been right. Thank you.
Okay. There's no further questions. Sean, I would just like to say thank you for the extensive answers you've given. Obviously wishing you well going forward with the St John's standard, and hope that it's something that we have to adopt in every other school. And we'll like to keep your name the St John's standard when it goes everywhere else as well. But okay, thanks very much for that. I'm going to move back. Councillor Short, you were looking to say something just as we closed the last item, so quite happy for you to ask any question or make a comment on that item.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, convener. I suppose hopefully Glyn is still on the call. My question was really about the fact that obviously these reports are a snapshot in time, as was the staff situation, but these young people, they are, you know, that's the formative part of their lives, and I'm just kind of hoping that there's still some kind of opportunity for those young people to always kind of be involved in this time, to make sure that we talk a lot about ACEs and childhood traumas and things. Is there a touch with these young people beyond this snapshot in time to make sure that there's no ramifications from the report and the changeover of staff effectively?
I hope there is, given that we're the corporate parents for a lot longer now than we used to be. So, but I'll look for Mr. Lloyd to give you that response, or our response.
Thank you, convener. Thank you, Councillor Shott. I think I would say two things. I think first of all, this inspection of the fostering and adoption teams did say that the relationships between the social workers and the foster carers was actually positive. You know, it was very good actually in that regard. I'd also say that in relation to the previous inspection report published last January by the Joint Inspection Team in relation to child protection arrangements generally, you know, we heard that overwhelmingly, and I think that was the word in the report, overwhelmingly, children and young people reported very positive, nurturing, respectful and supportive relationships. So I don't have any concerns about the nature of the relationships, the nature of the support provided either to foster carers or to children and young people. But we do have concerns, we share concerns with the Care Inspectorate and AFCA in relation obviously to the requirements and areas for improvement. And as we've said, we're addressing those via the improvement plan with some confidence that we're moving in the right direction.
Thanks, Glenn.
Okay, thanks very much. I take it then item 5 and 6 are both approved. And we'll move then on, Wally, to item 7 on the agenda.
Yeah, thanks, convener. Item 7 then is the HMI inspection of Victoria Park Primary School. Again, you're asking recommendations.
And Mrs. May, look to say a few words.
Yes, thank you. And also to introduce Leslie Ann Weir, who is the head teacher, well, the substantive head teacher of Victoria Park Primary School. We're asking Leslie Ann to help us out in another school currently, but she's certainly the head teacher in this report that's referenced. So just highlighting this is a full inspection again, so all 4 core QIs evaluated, and again you'll see them on page 2 of the report, section 4.6, and 2 very good evaluations and 2 good evaluations. So very good for leadership of change, which obviously comes from the head teacher but is reflected across her entire team, and of course raising attainment and achievement, also very good, with 2 goods for learning, teaching, assessment, and with the wellbeing quality indicator there at 3.1. So a very positive inspection and 4 very worthwhile and deserved evaluation grades. It's great again to see highlighted in the report the children themselves as a strength of the school, and it's just great when we hear that. And again, talking about an inclusive school, and that's important when you have a school with a diverse and sometimes transient population. So it's great to see that positive reflection of the support for children with English as an additional language, and of course the highly effective leadership of Leslie Ann herself, but also with a dedicated team. So it's reflecting the whole team focused on improving outcomes for children. So a very positive report. And again, as I've said, in scrutiny, we always get some areas to either build on our improvement or to continue to develop or to start to improve. And the areas there are really looking at building on and developing further areas around self-evaluation, the school improvement partnerships. This is again part of our overall strategy of EDLM. We have our schools visiting each other and learning from each other, and so sharing the practice. It's a whole part. You might have seen it. That was highlighted in the GTC magazine just this last month as national good practice, and so great to see that referenced in the inspection as well. And of course our termly visits ourselves and moderation activities and our support visits. So overall a good inspection, and I'll stop there and ask if you have any other questions for myself or Leslie Ann.
No problem then. Looks Billy McPherson's got a question.
It's not a question, it's just
Comment.
a comment, really, to be honest, convener. I completely concur with what you've said, Mrs. May. Obviously, again, this is a school I know extremely well. I know Leslie Ann extremely well, and she, I think in fact, the inspection outcome saying the highly effective leadership of the head teacher leading a dedicated team of teachers and support staff who engage regularly in a range of professional learning activities pretty much sums it up, doesn't it? This is an excellent report. I think it actually goes some way to showing that the school's doing things right when the two areas of improvement are things that they're doing anyway. And, continue to improve approaches to learning, teaching and assessment, and as planned, review and refresh the curriculum. I don't think you can say fairer than that. So what I would say is thank you very much, Leslie Ann, for all you do, but also please pass on the thanks, I hope, of everybody on the committee to all the staff at Victoria Park when you return, because I'm aware that you're assisting at another school at the moment. But if our thanks can be passed back to everybody at Victoria Park for a good job well done.
Sounds good. I'll let you take Fraser's kind words back for the whole of the committee then. Doesn't appear to be any other questions on this report. Thanks for that. So is that report agreed? Okay, we'll move on to the next report then. Oh, sorry, Lynn, you're looking to get in. You need to come off mute again.
Yep, I'm trying.
You're off. You're on.
There's definitely gremlins afoot this afternoon, convener. I'm sorry. Item 8, I'm going to leave the meeting at this point as I have a close personal relationship with one of the unnamed members of staff. So I wouldn't like to be involved in this part of the committee. If I can be excused and then come back in again.
Yeah, fair enough.
Thank you.
Okay, then, Willie.
Yeah, thanks very much, convener. Item 7 having been agreed. Item 8 then before he's entitled allegations in relation to gifts, hospitality and theft. This report's for noting.
Is anybody looking to make any comment on the report or just go to questions?
Convener, if I can just...
Yeah, Robert.
So this report's to advise the committee of the outcome of investigations into 2 whistleblowing allegations that were received, one in relation to gifts and hospitality and the other in relation to theft. The report outlines the outcomes of both of those cases and provides an overview of actions that have been taken since to reduce the risk of any further occurrence of such events in the future. And obviously officers are happy to take any questions on the report.
Okay, thanks for that then. Okay, we'll start with Billy McPherson.
Thanks indeed, convener. I want to make a comment first about the importance of transparency, because this is, reputationally not good for Dundee City Council. And I made the point, in fact, of going back to the 2 reports to Neighbourhood Services Committee of the 12th of February 2018 and the 11th of March 2019, the first one being for the pilot project, the second one being the substantive tendering report in relation to the smoke, heat, carbon monoxide detectors. And what was very interesting, and it goes back to what I said at Policy and Resources Committee on Monday night, about the way in which we present and evidence that best value is being achieved. Because what's quite clear here now, convener, is that we did not get best value, notwithstanding the other issues around this, which others will allude to. We did not get best value in relation to this particular project. But nonetheless, if you go back to the committee report of the 11th of March 2019, it reads, and I quote, "Negotiated contract in accordance with council procurement procedures that provides best value." And bearing in mind that the cost we're talking about is £7,208,685 and for some bizarre reason 17p, I think it's quite worrying the way we present, and I'm going to use the past tense because, to be fair to Mr. Colgan, He has now given assurances, and we had useful information from Mr. Thompson on Monday night about the way in which we present these reports in order for elected members to be satisfied and the wider public to be satisfied that actually best value is being achieved. And I think there's a role for elected members in asking the right questions. I'm just going to briefly mention a fairly, in my opinion, shocking example of being shot down for asking questions. You may recall at the Policy and Resources Special Committee on the 27th of March, I tried to ask a question about what was included in a particular tender of £100 million and was told I should have asked it at planning, which is nonsense, and was had my microphone switched off and was told that I would be given information later after the tender had been agreed. And that's a shocking example of conduct on behalf of the convener concerned. But the point I'm going to make here is tomorrow is a full month later from that committee taking place, and a full month later I have not had a jot of the promised information in relation to the question I asked. So the point I'm making to this committee today is that if there's a lesson to learn from the whole Edmondson Electrical fiasco, it is two things. One is that we ensure that we have the fullest information to evidence best value, and two, that we have conveners who are prepared to let elected members question that and ensure that everything that should be included in a tender is in a tender. I will be writing a letter of complaint to you on email, Greg, immediately after this meeting in relation to the lack of information I was given in relation to that other matter. But could I go back to transparency is important, and it's not a good look what happened on the 27th of March. And I hope that particular convener will A, recognise that, and B, not act in that manner again. I have a specific question. It's about what's at 5.3, and that's the issue of livery. And I find it, if I'm being honest, quite astonishing that any member of staff could take a council-owned vehicle and remove the livery and run about with it and use it for private use. And I would just like a little bit more information as to A, how that happened, B, how that was found out, if you like, and how that could never happen again. Because that's the important thing. I mean, lessons do have to be learned. It's easy to trip off the tongue, lessons have been learned. But I think we do need the assurance that the sort of situation of the misuse of council vehicles that happened in this particular case cannot possibly happen again.
Before I bring officers in to give you a response, I agree with your comments regarding the 27th of March, and if it had been the convener, you'd have got to have your say, given that one of my own councillors was closed down earlier on the same subject, and given that the spends and the complex nature of such, it wasn't a wise thing to do to try to railroad the thing through without proper scrutiny. I suppose in relation to livery, I've got a number of questions around that, or leaning around that, but I'll let officers respond to yourself first.
Thanks, convener. Maybe at this point, I think it would be helpful for committee just to have some advice from Mr. Meney, just regarding specific information about the individual cases that are presented in this report. And then after that, convener, if you're agreeable, I'm happy to come back regarding the assurances that Baillie McPherson is looking for around that specific query.
Okay.
Thanks, convener, and thanks, Baillie McPherson. As I think all elected members on the call will know, the council's policy is not to comment on individual personnel cases in public. It may be that during the course of the meeting, therefore, officers will indicate that information which they have can be shared, albeit in private, with elected members, and I hope elected members will understand the reasons for that. With that, I'll pass back to Mr. Colgan.
Could I just intervene at this stage just before Mr. Colgan comes back? I'm not asking about an individual. You know, that in a way has happened. I think my fundamental point is, what are the policies and procedures in place to ensure no misuse of council vehicles now and going forward? and to ensure that we can't have any misuse, for example, the removal of livery or private use that is not authorised happening in the future. So I understand your reason for saying that, Mr. Mennie, and I agree and concur with you completely on that. I'm talking really about the policy going forward, so elected members can, and I have to say the public can, because I think that is a publicly available thing, the assurance that we cannot have misuse of Dundee City Council owned vehicles at any point in the future.
Thanks, Bailey McPherson. So Ewan McNaughton, unfortunately, is not on the call, but I will provide information to members of scrutiny regarding the policies and procedures that individuals who have use of council vehicles are required to sign up to. But if it would be helpful, what I can do is to ask Louise Butcher to comment on the specific controls that are in place within construction services, given they have a large number of the fleet vehicles within the council's pool. So, convener, if you're happy with that, I'd just like to invite Louise to come in to talk about the specific controls, and I can share the general policy and procedures that the corporate fleet team have, which are provided to all staff.
I'm happy enough to share that, so over to Louise.
Yeah, thank you for that, Greg, and thank you, convener. In terms of our utilisation report, so it ties in with the current telematics policy. So what the service has in place is that there's utilisation reports that allow us to determine that vehicles are being used for the purposes that they're intended to. And we're currently working on those reports with trade unions, just in terms of the content, and really just to move forward with more detail if we can get to that point. But I think operationally what's important to note is that we have got a clear monitoring process in place that's reviewed on a monthly basis that identifies where every vehicle is, who it is allocated to, under which manager, and to which part of the service in which it's allocated to. And that manager then oversees the use of that vehicle. And for example, operationally, there's vehicle daily checks that are carried out each morning. And there's a set checklist that sets to look out from a health and safety perspective, but also, for example, to make sure that the livery, for example, that is clearly identified as a council vehicle. All our vehicles currently assigned to construction services are typically what you would see, so the small, medium and large vans, they've all got the Dundee City Council logos identified on that, and the only time that that wouldn't be available on the vehicle is if we've temporarily swapped a vehicle to get an MOT, for example, or a service. So we've been supplied something that really is just a temporary one. What I would also note is we have an allocated plant and vehicle officer based within construction services, and that officer also oversees the use, maintenance and service in both of our plant, but also of our fleet for the purpose of this report. And they tie in with the commercial manager and the operational manager on a monthly basis, and that informs our monthly fleet meetings that we'll have with the fleet manager that sits under Ewan's team. All vehicle requisition for vans need to be signed off by senior operational managers and the senior commercial manager. And if there are any exceptions to the hire or purchase of vans, then a business case would be required, and that would come to myself for sign off. Any private vehicle lease applications need to be signed off by myself, but also by the head of corporate finance and the head of people. And I touched on it just a moment ago, but we meet on a monthly basis, and that's with the corporate fleet team and the senior management team in construction services, and that meeting is solely around the use of fleet and plan within construction services. So I hope that helps.
I would just thank Louise for that. That was pretty comprehensive, to be fair. And I think, to be fair, I think procedures clearly have been tightened up, and I'm grateful to Louise for her response.
Okay, just as you'd maybe flag to officers that in relation to sort of whistleblowing, I raised with the former chief executive the fact that people were on golf outings, or they'd heard that. And I also raised the fact that a vehicle was being used for private use. that the liveries had been removed, and I even identified the type of vehicle. You know, so I'm wondering why it's no farming part of this and there's no body more detail in relation to that, given that, you know, if somebody decided that the vehicle was theirs, and it may well be that my understanding it was a Ford Ranger, that, you know, it was a 4x4, and I would imagine that the lease payments on that would be somewhere in the region of £500 a month. I don't know how many years the individual had that as a perk, if that's the case. And also the other thing I was hearing was it was always filled up at March Banks. So it looks like, you know, a considerable perk of the job, or effectively it was part of a theft. And I seen they referenced it in here. I don't know who had the vehicle, but I was looking for a bit more detail from officers around that vehicle, given that I raised it. And I raised it at a confidential briefing that we had, and that I kept confidential. And I raised it at briefings, being told I would be given answers. My questions would have been noted down, and I'd be given answers to these questions. Again, a former chief executive, but other members of the management team are around the table and were at that meeting. And I don't have answers to it. We're now 4 years on.
So, Bailey Keenan, if I can just come in and say that obviously from a perspective of responding to those questions, as Mr Many outlined, I'm happy to do so, and I'll just confirm to you out with the meeting what those questions are, so we are responding fully. With regards to the content of the report, if I can pass over to Mr Emmett in terms of that part of your question.
Thanks, convener. We've deliberately tried to write the report so that it can be considered in public, and therefore it doesn't go into detail about individuals or information that can enable individuals to be identified. As the Chief Executive said, happy to provide in private the additional information about the questions that you've raised, convener, but we've tried to make sure that the matters are transparently reported in public, rather than the report having to be one that's taken in private.
You know, if I'm right that somebody used a vehicle, it was £500 a month, and I had it for 5 years, they had some amount of take from the council. You know, how much are you prepared to write that can go in the public domain, that people are aware of the scam that was worked, if that's the case, was to that extent? By an individual, or individuals covering up for each other, perhaps.
So, Bailey Keenan, I believe Mr Emmett's provided a response to the question, and there is a report in front of committee today providing details, particularly within section 5, about the whistleblowing allegation and the actions that were taken by council officers.
Okay. We'll move on in questions then. Billy Wright.
Thank you. My question is on page 99, it's 5.5 on the charge, but really 5.6. On the 30th of May, the council was formally advised by the Procurator Fiscal had been instructed no further proceedings against the individuals. And on the same date, the Crown Office provided additional feedback on the case, advising the reason for this decision was that there was insufficient evidence to support the charges. I take it that part of when the charges were made, there would have appeared to have been enough evidence. I'm just curious. I mean, I understand both the court proceeding, because I sat on the bench for 17 years, and I understand the fiscal service, and to read that, the insufficient evidence to support the charges, I just wonder what they are, and maybe I certainly would like to take up your offer of finding out more about this particular case.
Thanks, convener. So if you're agreeable, if I can pass the Bailey Rights question to Mr. Emmett.
Thank you, convener, and thank you, Bailey Wright. So the I can't speak for the original decision by the prosecution service, but what I can tell you is that they wrote to us, and I'm happy to share the letter with members in confidence, setting out that at the time when they reached the decision, they were there was insufficient evidence to prove that the individuals were involved directly in letting of the contract. So they had determined not to proceed with the case, and that was, I think they would want to be clear, based on the evidence that they had at the time when they reached that decision. But as I've said, I'm happy to share the letter from the prosecution service with members, and you can see the information they provided to us at that time.
Okay, thank you. That will be interesting, because I would have thought the authority would have dotted its I's and crossed its T's, but thank you.
Okay, Councillor O'Nacla.
Convener, if I can, I could see Mr. Many's looking to come in.
Okay, Mr. Many.
Thank you, convener. Can I also add to the comments that Mr. Emmett has made? The Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service have confirmed that they do reserve the right to prosecute should the picture of evidence change at some stage in the future.
Okay, thanks for that, Mr. Many. Councillor O'Nacla.
Thank you. We've obviously had a briefing, and I feel that from the information given that, you know, the new procedures that are in place seem to be a lot stronger, and so that this never happens again. I guess my question is, why were these measures not put in place sooner?
Yeah. Thanks, convener. If I can maybe start by answering that question. Some of the procedures, Councillor O'Nacla, may have been in place. It simply might not be they have been followed exactly to the noted procedure. So what we've tried to do in the actions that officers took immediately and subsequently is not only ensure that we reviewed policies and controls, but we highlighted and provided appropriate briefing and training to all staff who are involved in the procurement processes. We've also, in a number of areas, and Mr. Many may want to comment on it, highlighted specific areas around gifts and hospitality and declaration of interest, so that we have further heightened the level of controls that are available within the organisation. So, convener, I'm not sure if there's anything else that Mr. Many may want to add to my response to Councillor O'Nacla.
Yeah, Mr. Many.
Thank you, convener, and thank you, Councillor O'Nacla. It may assist the committee to be aware that there is no requirement for the council to maintain a register of officers' interests, but it was decided that it would be good practice to do so. That officers' register of interest has now been maintained over a period of years, and as with all systems of control, it is kept under review. If it appears that the systems of control are not sufficiently robust, then they are reviewed. In this particular case, we did review the register of officers' interests. We have made certain changes to that in light of the experience that we've gained, and we would continue to do that in ensuing years if it subsequently came to our attention that the system that we had did not provide the control that we required. In the case of the register of gifts and hospitality, my own view is that the previous policy was adequately clear. However, on the basis that certain members of staff did not appear to believe that it was clear and did not follow the policy, it was decided that that also ought to be changed in light of that experience. We now have greater controls in place, including requiring all officers to sign to confirm that they have received the policy, and the procedures for the acceptance of gifts and hospitality have now also been made clearer and more detailed, so that no officer should be in a position to claim that they did not understand the requirements that are placed on them by their contract of employment.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Sawyers. Bailey Sawyers, sorry.
Of course, Neil Keenan. I had a number of questions about processes and changes and procedures going forward. So in 5.7 in the report, it references the fact that the the supply contract for the smoke alarms was tendered prior to the, I suppose, the overall installation contract at Neighbourhood Services. So my first question is, what steps are in place to ensure that we do things in the right order? 6.1 talks about an allegation that an employee was selling council-owned smoke alarms on eBay. Obviously, there are other pieces of equipment that are replaced from time to time, and I guess probably have some sort of scrap value. So what processes are in place to ensure that materials that are removed from houses or other council property are disposed of in the proper manner? And thirdly, on 8.1, it's saying that if we procured the smoke alarms through Scotland Excel, that would have been cheaper than what was done. So again, what processes are in place to ensure that doing things properly?
Okay, convener, if I can start off by trying to answer some of those questions that Bailey Sawyers has raised, and if we don't have the information, happy to circulate that to members. So in terms of 5.8, which was the order in which the contract was awarded, on Monday night, committee agreed revised protocols around the procedures that we'll use for further tendering. So that will enhance the control environment with that approval coming way up front and not just at the tender point. But in addition to that, to give members of scrutiny assurances, we have looked back the regulated procurement and have established that particularly the last 19, all of those have followed the correct procedures in terms of coming to committee and then the contract being awarded depending on the decision that committee has made. In addition to that, the report notes that we have strengthened the training that is available to officers and that we have carried out. And at present, we have realigned the staff around the commodities within the procurement team, and we have dedicated procurement staff within construction services where a large amount of procurement is done given the services that they provide. In terms of your third point regarding 8.1, it relates back to previous comments around ensuring that we have been open and transparent when we are using frameworks so that we can demonstrate that that work around best value, the work around quality has been done, or indeed if we're going out to the market, we're being clear about how we are evaluating the cost element of contracts and quality elements. So hopefully that gives you the assurance that we're looking at best value, but best value will be that mixture between cost and quality. In terms of the disposal of equipment, there will be policies and procedures that will be in place regarding the classification of small electrical equipment or small value assets. I don't have the details to hand. I'm sure internal audit have reviewed that procedure before, and I'm happy to circulate any further information we've got and indeed provide that assurance that we do have an agreed procedure in place to ensure that assets are being disposed of correctly and we don't have this situation occurring again.
That's helpful. Convener, can I ask just a quick supplementary, please?
Ask as many as you like. I'll not stop you.
That's quite all right. The main supply contract for the smoke alarms was a few £1 million. I can't remember the exact number, but obviously a substantial amount of money. Is there a kind of a level of, I suppose what I'm trying to get at is what level of seniority would a member of staff have to be involved in a several £1 million contract? Is that something that, for example, Louise would have to sign off, or is it not work that way?
Yep, thanks, convener. So again, I'll maybe start that off and perhaps come to Mr. Mennie. So the contract that's included in the report before you was a capital contract, and no officer would have delegated authority to approve that level of contract. The process that should have been followed was that that would have been discussed with relevant officers and form part of a committee report that then would have been scrutinised by the council leadership team, including the Section 95 officer, monitor officer and myself. But perhaps Mr Menny may want to add further information regarding Bailey Sawyer's question, convener.
Mr Menny.
Thank you, convener. Thank you, Bailey Sawyers. Just to confirm that in both these cases, the contract with Dundee Contract Services was awarded by a council committee, and therefore it was I who signed those contracts. Other contracts are dealt with in accordance with the council's tender procedures, which are contained in standing orders, and essentially the level at which staff are entitled to procure goods, services, regulated partly depending upon whether it's capital or revenue expenditure, and partly depending upon the level of that revenue expenditure. All capital expenditure contracts coming to committee.
So, convener, can I come back in? I think there's maybe a misunderstanding, or maybe I'm not expressing myself very well. Obviously, the main £7 million contract was approved by the Neighbourhood Services Committee, but prior to that, there was the direct award of the supply contract. I suppose what I'm trying to get at is what are the processes for approving that supply contract?
So, convener, if I can just ask Mr Menny to answer that question.
I think Bailey Sawyer's question relates to the action of an individual officer or officers. So my advice to the committee is that any information which is to be shared should be shared in confidence separate from this meeting.
That's fine, thanks.
Yeah. I suppose again, I would ask that if we're going to come back with a number of responses to questions that have been asked at the committee, that we'll look at what can go in the public domain. Because, you know, if some of these things have been talked about in every pub in the town, then what would be wrong about them being talked at a council committee? And, you know, I'm going to go on and ask a few more questions myself. In relation to the livery on the vehicle, how would that be removed? Does somebody need to take a heat gun to the side and start melting off the transfers, or what's the process for removing that?
So, Bailey Keenan, I'm not aware of what the process would be for removing livery from a vehicle, but if you're agreeable, I'll see if there's any other officer on the call that would be able to provide a response to you. And I also note that Mr Menny, I think, is looking to come in just to a previous point that you may have made.
Okay. Thanks. Mr Menny, then, to start with.
Thank you, convener. Just to confirm in answer to your last point, I think as elected members will be aware, there are two types of information. There's information which the committee can consider in public, and there's information which is considered in private. And I give you my assurance that I will review the information which is made available to me, and I will give members of the committee a view on whether or not that's information that can be shared publicly or must be kept private in accordance with the relevant legislation, convener.
Thanks very much for that. Can I maybe ask in relation to the goods that were sold on eBay, and to what value do the council believe the extent of that theft was?
Thanks, convener. I don't have that specific information to hand, but I know that Shona Duncan is on the call, and I don't know whether Shona has that specific information.
Thank you, Greg, and thank you, convener. I don't have the specific information at hand, but I can get it and will pass it to Greg to pass on to you. Okay,
and can I maybe ask a bit more about that? But what, you know, if council knew that goods that were taken had a shelf life Did we have to do anything to make sure that we could get some of this stuff back for people, given that it might not be compliant and people would be putting it in their homes? Albeit, you know, it was an employee of ours that put them into the public domain anyway. Was there any real issues there in relation to their ability to keep a home safe moving forward?
Thanks, convener. I'll maybe ask Mr. Many to provide a view there around what I think your question might be about the council's responsibility around that equipment, given that it was then passed on. So, Roger, I don't know if you're able to answer that question.
Yes, thank you, Greg, and thank you, convener. My view is that since the equipment was sold by an individual, the council would have no responsibility for any loss, injury or damage that may result from the use of that stolen property.
Should there have been a public health warning issued for council if it's got a shelf life? Might no responsibility to sort it, but do we have a responsibility to tell people that what they've taken, perhaps installed in their house, isn't going to keep them safe? Or, you know, there's a potential for it's, you know, it being it's an obsolete piece of kit within a certain period of time that we've taken it out to bin it.
Thanks, convener. I think Mr. Many has responded to the earlier question where we don't believe there is any obligation on the council with regards to the point that you've raised.
Okay, did we recover any monies in relation to the amount of stolen goods? Mr. Many.
Thanks, convener. Yes, the court made a compensation order in favour of the council. My recollection, it was in the order of £8,000, which should be reflective of the amount of equipment that was stolen from the council.
So given that so much has went through the court, then is that going to open the door for more information to come to us in relation to the questions that we've asked?
Convener, I'll maybe ask Mr. Many to respond to your question. I think, as Mr. Emmett said, there are two parts to the report. The majority of the questions that have been asked so far relate to one part, and Mr. Many's response there regarding the court order is the second part. But Mr. Many, I don't know if you want to come in.
I'm certainly not aware that there are any continuing proceedings, apart from the fact that, as indicated earlier, the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service have reserved the right to prosecute in the event that further evidence becomes available, convener. Clearly, if there are further court proceedings, other information may come into the public domain at that time.
So I suppose what I'm asking, if there's been a word of court against an individual and they were the one using the vehicle, are we going to get that level of detail on that or on that vehicle, given that they've been to court and been charged? Do we still have some level of duty to an employee under these circumstances? Mr. Many.
Thanks, convener. I have to say, I don't know whether or not the individual that you're referring to was the same as the other individual to which you're referring, but I'm sure that officers will consider your question, and given the nature of it, I would suggest again that that information should be shared with you in private if that is what is required, and if it can be made public, I've no doubt that officers would make it public.
Okay. Thanks very much for this. I see no further questions. We're happy to move on for this report, noting where it's got to in the meantime. Okay, thanks for that then. Okay, Willie.
Thanks very much, convener. I'm aware that Councillor Short was absent for that meeting. If you bear with me just a moment, I'll just invite her back into the meeting.
Okay. Okay, well, she's got some questions, but we'll give her an opportunity if she has.
Sorry, yeah, I was aware she declared an interest in that particular item.
Okay. No
as we're moving on to item 9, item 8 has been noted. Item 9, I'll invite her back in.
Sure. Okay, then you're back in. Okay, Willie, we're good to go.
Okay, thank you very much then. Convener, item 9 then before you is the internal audit reports. These are for noting, and Cathy Wiley's here to speak to that item.
Okay, then, Cathy, you want to go through your
Thank you.
first item?
Yeah, thank you. So the first item that we've got here is these are the reports that have been finalised since we reported to the last scrutiny meeting. And we've got a report on children and families, school income collections and reconciliations, and the other two reports that we're bringing today are follow-up reports on commercial lets and integrated impact assessments. In terms of the school income collections and reconciliations, I'm on page 105 here. The scope and objectives for this were to ensure that there was adequate controls in place covering systems for income collection and recording and bank reconciliations each month in each school. And we were undertaking this work in in secondary schools. In the conclusion section here, we've separated the conclusion out between school funds and council funds because there were different conclusions. For the school funds, the conclusion was that there were significant weaknesses in relation to the operation of the processes which needed to be addressed. And in terms of the council's funds, the conclusion was that whilst there was basically a sound system, there were some areas where it was viewed that there were some improvements that could be made. And most of the recommendations that we've made were, as you would expect from those conclusions, to do with the school funds. And just very briefly, these were around making sure that procedures and guidance were up to date and reflected what was currently happening, and that where required training would be given when these were updated. Making sure that, as is required, the school fund accounts have an annual independent verification and are signed off as such, because we identified that none of them had had that done. There is an issue around lack of availability for cheque signatories for school funds, and one of the schools had got round that by having signed blank cheques kept in the safe, which is obviously not a sensible thing to be doing. Regular safe counts were not being carried out. Some of the bank reconciliations were not being consistently carried out, and there was a lack of systematic review of balances that were owed to the council. Which meant that there were overdue amounts in all of the schools, apart from one that we looked at when we were undertaking the audit. Each of the individual schools was given specific action points arising from the audit visit to them specifically, but obviously these are general points there that have been summarised for the report. In terms of the other two reports that we've got, follow-up of commercial lets and the follow-up of the integrated impact assessments, they were both follow-ups from previous work, and in both cases we identified that all of the outstanding actions have now been implemented, and therefore the conclusions in both of these follow-ups is that the actions taken by management have addressed the control weaknesses that were highlighted in the original reviews. And there's nothing that I want to highlight specifically for either of those, so I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I notice Billy McPherson's looking to come in.
Thanks indeed, Convener. And obviously, the school income collections and reconciliations report doesn't frankly read well in terms of practice. I mean, bank reconciliations not being carried out, reviewed and signed off. Who on earth would think it was acceptable to have signed blank cheques, held within the premises, and no carrying out of safe counts in schools, and money is being held that were in excess of insurance limits. That's all really poor practice, to be perfectly frank. And I am aware of the fact that the department itself, I think, asked internal audit in to ensure that systems, to the credit of the department, they had obviously some issues, and obviously I assume as a result of all this, things have been well tightened up, because really some of the practices there are really not acceptable. My question is really around the first point in the conclusions about procedures and guidance manual relating to financial processes in the schools have not been updated for some time and are no longer respective of current practice. And what concerns me about that is who's actually reading the procedures and guidance manual, if that can be allowed to tick on for a time, because it's quite clear that certain procedures were, did not follow what was in the guidance material. And that leads me to wonder, are people actually reading that guidance material? Because if they were, they would know that the guidance material was out of date. So I suppose my question is, whilst I recognise what Cathy Wiley had to say, and thanks for that in relation to taking things forward. I think the assurance I would want from the department is, in relation to the procedures and guidance material, are they updated now so they do reflect practice, but also what's the process for ensuring that on an ongoing basis, staff who are responsible are actually being kept updated on that procedure and guidance material, so that we are satisfied that they're actually acting in accordance with it?
Jamie, we'll give a response.
Happy to.
This is me.
Thank you, convener, and thanks for the question, Bailey McPherson. And I know it's not helpful, but yes, we agree with everything you've said. And so, yeah, in terms of the recommendations, I would want to provide a reassurance that the guidance has been updated, but not just in terms of documentation, but there's actually been follow-up training around that guidance for both business managers and for head teachers. We've also shared the report with our colleagues in our schools so that they understand the seriousness of getting this wrong. And so there's been that input, and where there's been some gaps in that training, there's follow-up dates already in the diary for this month, in fact, in the next week or so. So we've also put into place extra scrutiny around this. So it's not just about issuing guidance and delivering a one-off training. It's about follow-up termly visits by the relevant officers who are going to check that the guidance has been adhered to. And in terms of the checklist, things are being looked at. And of course, that will then be brought back into meetings in my team with senior officers having the overview of that work. And these termly visits have already started in some establishments. So we can see that that's in place and it's already started. And as I say, there's plans to continue that through the rest of this term with dates in the diary for follow-up and catch-up training for those who missed the first round of training. So we've taken, as you said, and referred to yourself, we were aware that there were some gaps. Just now we picked up things ourselves, and that's why when we met with our internal auditors last year, we asked for this to be looked at because we realised we needed these fresh and external scrutiny eyes on it. And so they've come back with, a very challenging report that we're certainly not proud of, but we have addressed the issues there and will continue to take this, I think, a bit more seriously in terms of our scrutiny around it going forward. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'm grateful for Mrs. May's reply. The training and follow-up, I think, is helpful and frankly necessary. Obviously, there are changes in personnel as well, on an ongoing basis across the school estate, obviously. I assume that there are also procedures in place to ensure that any new staff go through that training.
Absolutely, I can confirm that induction of head teachers and new business managers will receive a finance input as part of that induction process. Absolutely, and because of what's surfaced through this report and our scrutiny process, we will look at changing that and making that a bit more robust as well going forward. Thank you.
Very helpful. Thank you.
And a similar question, but I think you've responded to through the procedures question that you've answered to Bailey McPherson. Can I maybe just ask, and it's probably not yourself, but I mean, £69,000 outstanding invoices for over 3 months. How do we normally capture these things, given that, we make out we'd like to pay people within a few weeks ourselves? So why we're in organisations leaving things outstanding for 3 months?
I think someone from finance, corporate finance, will perhaps.
Jackie, I see you've got your hand up.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Bailey Keenan, for the question. Yeah, so it's one of my teams, the sales ledger team, that will look at outstanding invoices, and on a monthly basis, we'll review any outstanding invoices. There's an automatic procedure in terms of some reminders, but we will make contact with the departments to chase up payments. Often there's disputes going on between departments in terms of the outstanding values, obviously not in this case with the school funds, but you know, going forward on the back of this report, we'll ensure that we're following these up on a timely basis.
What would be the normal red letter day for someone that's fell behind? Perhaps myself even.
We would normally send out a reminder after I think it's 30 days of the invoice, and that would be an automatic reminder, and then it would be a manual process to chase that up thereafter.
Yeah.
I see Paul's also got his hand up and may want to add into this.
Paul.
Yeah, thank you, Bailey Keenan. Just to say, following issue of the report, I have had correspondence with the service and advised that in this case where the school fund is contributing to the cost of goods, then that payment should be made up front rather than being invoiced retrospectively to avoid the need of an invoice altogether.
That's the sort of good finance answer that, Paul. Get your money up front before you gearing away. Eh? Very good. Kevin Cardell, please. Councillor Cardell.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering, you know, how often do we have conversations with other local authorities about how they're doing things before it gets to an audit stage, or if we have new staff coming into establishments that come in and say, well, actually, this is how we do it in this local authority. Maybe we should be looking to implement it here. Do we have open door policies for that happening if new staff come in with, well, this is done a certain way somewhere else and we think it would be better?
We're away to the races, Kevin. We haven't a shared auditor, but we'll let Cathy or some others give you a response.
Just from an audit perspective, I would say, yeah, we do share information, and we do have a system whereby if we need information about how other people are doing things when we're undertaking an audit, we can speak to the auditors in any of the other councils across Scotland to be able to get benchmarking information if it's useful to have that. I think in terms of what happens right across the council, it very much will depend on what the area of operation is and whether or not there are national standards we're working to, or whether it is more local in terms of how things are implemented. But maybe other people who would want to comment on what happens in their services.
Yeah. Anybody else looking to make a comment?
Convener, happy to add to that, you know, through the Association of Directors, we have different national networks, so we do share practice, and we would have colleagues on these various networks, personnel networks, resources networks. So it is an opportunity, if you like, to share practice and to learn when people are moving forward, and often when things are changing, like recently the DSM guidance and so on, we would work with other local authorities, you know, not in isolation to look at that. So there are opportunities to do more of that.
Okay, see the Chief Execs looking to come in.
Actually, me, Convener, if I may. So,
okay,
specific in relation to finance, there are sets of PIs which provide a starting point for looking at some of these things. They're usually a starting point rather than an answer, because when you delve into it, usually the detail explains why there are reasons, but it gives you a starting place for looking at where things can do. And there is very good sharing of practice across councils in Scotland. I would say if we're looking for information, then other councils are very willing to share that as good practice, or perhaps they're more willing to share it the better practice it is. But there is a lot of good collaboration that we can take advantage of, and we do take advantage of.
Okay.
Thank you.
There looks to be no further questions. Look at the room for people waving hands at us and all the rest of it, but doesn't appear to be that either. Well, okay, is that report agreed? And let's move on to the next item. Agreed. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Convener, for item being agreed. Item 10 then, before his internal audit plan update and progress report. Again, this is for noting.
You want to make any comment, Cathy? Or?
Just very briefly, just to say this is just an update on where we are with the plan for the current year and the items that had been carried forward from the previous year. The tables from page 111 onwards show you the current status of the pieces of work that are not complete yet, and it also shows you a cumulative picture of what the levels of assurance are from the work that has been reported and finalised and brought to the committee. And then the second appendix in the report is information about the numbers of outstanding actions from previous reports that are still open. As you can see, table 1 is items that haven't reached their original date yet, and the other 2 tables are items that have passed their due date and need to have revised dates agreed. This is being managed through the Risk and Assurance Board, and we are working with services to try and get these actions new dates and also to try and clear the older ones as quickly as possible. But I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, Bailey McPherson.
Thanks, convener. Just really a question for Cathy. I've gone through this in relation to the information in the 23-24 internal audit plan at item 12, just to see, you know, things that have been removed from the plan for 22-23. Are they in the plan for 23-24? If you follow my drift.
Yes.
And it might just be me, because obviously there's a bit of, you know, comparing one with other.
Yeah.
But I was just really so it might just be me not noticing. But can I just ask what's being done in relation to the proposed system review for self-directed support going forward?
Yeah, that has not been included in the plan. You're correct for the 23-24. One of the reasons that wasn't included was because when we looked at that again, there's new guidance come out for that, and it was felt that it would be better to wait a bit of time and then look at it again. So that is likely to appear in the 24-25 plan. So you'll see that coming forward next year. The other thing I would say, depending on the timing of that, when we get to the plan, I can talk about it. But we will review the plan during the year, and if there's a reason for changing that, then we will change it.
Okay, that's a perfectly understandable reason. Perfectly happy with that. Thanks, Cathy.
Thank you.
Okay, there's no other questions on this report. Is this report agreed? Okay, let's move on to the next report then.
Yeah, thanks very much, convener. Item 11 then, before you, the Audit Scotland annual audit plan. Again, this is for noting.
Does anybody want to make any comment on this report?
Thank you, convener. If I could just introduce it. First of all, this obviously sets out the plan for the external audit for the year ahead. Just to draw your attention in the recommendations to the timing of the report to your committee in October, and also that the best values usage report will come back in November. But with your permission, Kevin, perhaps we can invite colleagues from Audit Scotland just to provide an overview for the committee.
Yeah. Well, you go then, gents. Cheers, Brian.
If I may. Good afternoon to you, to all the committee members. I just want to take a quick canter through the paper, really. I'm referring to some of the paragraphs from page 127 of your papers onwards. So first of all, delighted to be the external auditor of Dundee City Council for the next 5 years. I'm joined in the meeting as well by Richard Smith, who's a senior audit manager for the council. He's also the appointed auditor for the charitable trusts that belong to the council. Richard has been involved in the council audit for 3 years, so actually quite unusual in this audit that we've got some degree of consistency over the change in appointment of appointed auditor, so that's great to note. Just in terms of paragraph 12 on page 128, we do believe communication is important, and our planning process is a continuous process. So if there are any issues that members want to bring to our attention to inform our plan as we go through the audit year, then happy to hear these, particularly around issues like fraud. We've already discussed some of those issues earlier in earlier papers. In terms of the main risks that drive our audit planning, these are in Exhibit 2 on page 131 of your papers. The first one of those is management override. We're required to recognise that risk by international auditing standards. We have a number of audit procedures to address it, which are listed there. We also use data analytics techniques in this audit, where we get and analyse all the transactions, looking for unusual or outlier or risky items to investigate and test. The second item in terms of risks, significant risks, are around the estimation in valuation of land and buildings. It was 1718 since the last significant increase within the council. Since then, there's been very minor or negative changes in value of the assets. Given there's been significant inflationary pressures in rebuild prices and retender costs, where we feel that that's a major factor in the valuation, and we'll be undertaking a robust review of that. We've already met with finance staff and valuer staff on that aspect of the audit to get further insight into the process and discuss how that's taken forward. Our third point, similar to other land and buildings, the last revaluation in dwellings houses was 1819. Since then, it's again been largely negative changes in value. So again, there's a similar approach in terms of the robustness of the audit over those areas. The other areas we consider less significant, and they cover pension assets, pension liabilities, and PPP balances. Particularly pensions this year, we expect to see changes in discount factors and pensions increases, possibility of net pension assets, and a whole new set of rules and regulations come into play in terms of recognising potential net pension assets, which, if that's the case, Dundee City Council will have a look at that detail in terms of the accounting for it. Just from the rest of the report, as I've mentioned, page 135, we talk about the audit of the trusts. As I say, Richard is the auditor of the trust, and will answer any questions that's relevant to that area. I won't say anything else beyond that at the moment. The risks are similar and repeated for the trusts in Exhibit 4. Just touching on best value, I think as our report notes, best value now is embedded in the annual audit process. There's not a separate process for that, for assessing best value. This year, we're going to concentrate on looking at vision, leadership, performance. We'll bring a separate report to the council in due course. The plan is to report that to the Accounts Commission in November 2023 in terms of one of the first councils to be reported in this new approach to best value. The rest of the report, we note at paragraph 51 that one of the things that we're still feeling the legacy of as auditors is COVID and the delayed timetables during the COVID period. We are late starting in terms of the audit of all our bodies, and although there are regulations to aim to have the accounts signed off by the end of September, it's actually not possible, not because of the audited bodies, not in the case of Dundee City Council, but it's because of our restrictions on the resources that we have for audit. So it's just to bring that to your attention. We would like to get back to normal reporting timetables, and we're working towards that each year. The very last thing to say probably is around paragraph 55, which is around the audit fee. There is a significant change this year in the audit fee, and it would probably be remiss of me if I didn't mention that. Greg and Robert have already raised this with us. All of the audited bodies across Audit Scotland benefited from the last procurement round we had, which was over 6 years ago, where the firms that do audits for us, there are 40% of the work goes to private firms, benefited from discounts as a result of that procurement work. This last time, which is obviously this is the first year of a new procurement round, we haven't seen those discounts being offered by firms, and it's had an upward pressure on the audited costs across our audited bodies. If I go back in history before the last procurement round, which is over 6 years ago now, the actual increase since then is it's about 1.2% a year. So we haven't seen massive increases, but it does look like a big jump because of the benefit that we got from that procurement round over the last 6 years. What I hope that it'll provide is a bit of certainty for the next 5 years of this procurement round, that fee increases will be pegged to any salary increases that we suffer within the organisation. So that's a bit of a canter through, and I'm happy to take questions. And if there's any questions that Richard can answer better than me, then I'll bring Richard in. So thank you very much.
Okay, Brian, thanks very much for that overview. And obviously we're reading in the press how difficult it is to get an auditor at the moment. You don't appear to be able to get them for love nor money. But you mentioned obviously within your overview there about the sort of assets and the how it's not been evaluated within a period of time. So just for me moving forward, what would be the difference in it being overvalued or undervalued in property? I think you mentioned 1718 and 1819 for different types of property that we have. So what would I be looking out for in the future? And I suppose I'm glad, of course, that the officers did put you on the spot, because it's not only my job to ask for the discount. But
I mean, in terms of valuations, being absolutely frank, I think sometimes auditors care about this more than perhaps others might do. We are held to account quite strongly by our scrutiny bodies and inspectors around aspects of valuation now. In terms of very practical things, it makes little difference to the income and expenditure of the council about the overall valuation of assets. I think what could be argued is that where valuation is important, particularly assets are becoming more valuable as the rebuild costs of those assets are increasing. There's something about both protecting the scale of protectionism of those assets, but also, you know, the investment that's required in those assets to maintain them going forward. So there's an importance just from that sense around the valuation. I suppose there's a bit of story, it's a personal story, about where I'm coming from on this. About 5 years ago, we saw a very significant increase in one of my councils when they revalued the school estate on a 5-year rolling programme. It went up by almost £1 billion. And that alerted me at the time to the fact that we needed to be more conscious of this, not a rolling programme that was once every 5 years, but an annual look at how value was changing over time. There's also been pressure from down south that more of this annual review of value needs to be done. There's a requirement in the Code of Practice to have a look at the current cost each year end. And I'm not sure that that has been strong enough as it should have been in looking at this. The outside driver, obviously, has been that we've seen insignificant inflation in many areas, but particularly in building costs, where we're seeing retender prices increase quite considerably, and that's a major component of the depreciated replacement cost evaluation in councils. So that's where we've come from in terms of thinking that these are more significant factors than they may have been in the past, and why we're putting more emphasis on it as part of the audit approach.
And Brian, thanks very much for that response. That'll help me moving forward. It'll put the lighted matches of low officers' fingers and nails now for get them improved assets that we've got. Thanks very much for that. There's no other questions, so is this report agreed? Okay, thanks very much for that. Wally, we'll move on.
Okay, thank you. Item 12 then, before his internal audit plan, and this is for approval.
Okay, you want to say anything on this audit plan, Cathy?
Yeah, please, just a little. I'll keep it short because I know we're getting to time.
Yep.
So I have to produce a risk-based plan to be compliant with the standards that we need to comply with, and I am happy to say that I think that this is a risk-based plan that complies with that. Just a little bit about resources, which is another thing that I need to talk to you about. The service is provided by an in-house team. There have been some changes to that team just in the last year, and as a result of that, I've assessed that we don't need the same level of input from a contractor that we've had previously, and it was approved at the last P&R committee that we would go out to tender for some IT support and just a little bit of general support that will be needed for the team. We do have one vacancy in the team at the moment, but we're actively pursuing filling that. The plan that I've put together at the moment assumes that that vacancy isn't filled at the moment, and once that vacancy is filled, we will revisit the plan and see whether we should add anything in. The other thing that the plan assumes is that the current arrangement that we've got, whereby I'm shared resource with Angus Council, will either continue after the current year in October is up, or it will be replaced by a similar arrangement so that the same amount of resource is available. I don't have anything specifically to say about the plan itself. We've changed the way that we pulled the plan together a little bit this year. We've still talked to stakeholders, and we do still use the high-level audit universe, but we created a much more detailed audit universe this year and mapped that into the risk registers of the council. We considered other sources of information that would help us as a team to evaluate the risk. and then we risk assessed all of the areas within that new universe. And I just checked before I came on here, and we have about 300 lines in that Excel spreadsheet. So I didn't think that you would want to see all of that, but it has distilled down into the plan that we've shown you, which is in the appendix here, which is on page 155 onwards. There's nothing specific that I want to speak about in terms of what's in the plan, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Doesn't appear to be any questions for you, Cathy, so thanks very much for your overview of that report. Is this report agreed? Okay, then, Willie.
Okay, thank you very much. The remaining item 13, Risk Management Annual Report. This was remitted back to you by the Policy and Resource Committee of 6th of March.
Does anybody want to make any comment? I think we've seen it before. Is there any questions on the report that people would like to ask of officers? In which case, is the report agreed?
Actually,
Okay.
I'm looking for a question.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay,
Helen,
it's
sorry,
actually, it's on page 163, at 7.8 on the workforce. I just wonder how far forward we are, considering this is a yearly report, but the difficulties, recruitment and retention associated with the loss of experienced members of the council's workforce and the strains on the officers that are actually left. So I'm just wondering where we are, because it's a high category, 12. So I was curious about that one. I have a second question at 7.14. That is about the National Care Service. And to be quite honest, we don't often see 25, which is very high, which is a concern on where we're going. I know that we really don't have any control yet, but I was just wondering if there was any update on what was likely to happen there.
Does anybody want to give a response to Bailey Wright?
Yeah, thanks, convener. So happy to give a response to Bailey Wright. So in relation to the risk on workforce, it's still the case that we are seeing certain disciplines, and that includes things like building standards, IT, and finance. But what we are seeing is improvements. So previously we did have some challenges around disciplines in the council, and we've looked at graduate programmes, we've looked at further traineeships, and we've looked at partnering. So a previous example, convener would be Cathy Wiley being that shared audit resource between Dundee and Angus. So it continues to be a risk, and I think from speaking to colleagues, that risk is shared across the public sector, but it's one that officers are very acutely aware of, and one that we're trying to do everything about. In terms of the risk that's noted at 7.14 on the National Care Service, my understanding is that the work in relation to that within the Parliament has been delayed further, and at present we're just waiting for a further update around potential timescales and if there is any change relating to the plan of forming a National Care Service, and we'll assess how that impacts local government and report that once we have further information, convener.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that.
Just a bit of information for you on the National Care Scheme. I raised it at the Pension Committee, Bailey Wright, just to make sure that the Pension Committee were giving consideration to what might happen. Because looking back years gone by, I believe people that worked for the region in water all moved to Scottish Water, and all their pensions moved to Aberdeen Pension Scheme. So it's no beyond an exodus for the Tayside Pension Scheme if something like that were to happen. So I think it's a risk that is lying there as well. Just a whole host of risks that are unknown in relation to the National Care Scheme at the moment. There doesn't appear to be any other questions. So is this report agreed? Thanks for your time. Thanks for all the questions you asked, and see and enjoy the rest of your day. Catch you later.
Thank you. Bye.
Cheers now. Bye bye.
Bye now.
Thank you.